So this will be our topic for today. It's my pleasure to be with all of you in this week's episode of Webinars at AGF. So we have 4 topics that we're going to go cover in this webinar. Number 1 is the management review process. Let's take a look at this process. Are we going to document this process? Should this be a documented procedure? What do we need to prepare? How do we effectively prepare? What is the process? And then, of course, second is let's take a look at what should be reviewed. I've seen so many management review where we go to the boardroom or we go to the review meeting only to find out that no one prepared the data, the information, the reports, the feedback that are so important inputs in doing the management review. So once and for all, let's identify this. What really should be reviewed? What should be in the agenda? And then third, let's talk about management review inputs and outputs. This is where ISO 9001-2015 is very prescriptive, by the way. When I say prescriptive, the standard provided a certain set of requirements, a certain set of inputs that you need to place in your management review. And of course, not only inputs, but what do we get out of it? What should be mandatory out? And this is prescribed by your ISO 9001. Lastly, audit points. After all, our objective today is how do we prepare for this? How do we audit it? Hence, let's check it so that we can be ready moving towards the third-party certification audit. Now, so let's take a look at 9.3.1. What does it say? This is our basis. In 9.3.1, look at this. Top management shall review the organization's quality management system. It's mandatory. You shall review. Now, as to how often are we going to do it, how frequent, the standard is only saying at planned intervals. So it's really up to you. Best practice here is that organizations review their management system on an annual basis. At the end of the year or year end, they include this in your year-end planning specific to their quality management system. So why do we need to do this? This is to ensure that your quality management system is suitable for achieving your strategies or your goals. It is adequate, and most importantly, it is effective. It is aligned to the strategic direction of the organization, hence the management review. So this may be similar to your other meetings or your year-end planning that you do in your respective organizations, whether you're an electric cooperative, you're a state university, you're a government agency, or a private entity, a service-oriented organization. You do this review, but specifically in ISO 9001, the term we use is management review in accordance to clause 9.3.1. We oftentimes hear this question, do we need to document this as a procedure? The question here is to document or not to document. Should we document this procedure? Here's what I'm going to say. This is not a mandatory procedure to be documented. However, we strongly recommend that you do put this into a documented process. Put this into documented procedure so that we have a guide now on how to do this. Precisely the reason why we have confusion as to how we prepare during management review is because this has not been documented into a formal guideline, flow, a procedure, and so on and so forth. So I strongly recommend that you still document this and include this, enroll this in your management system. Now, whether you're going to document it or not, what's important is that the following should be clear, no? But then again, like I said, if you can document it, that would be very helpful for your organization. The documented procedure should, number 1, define who is responsible for the management review. This is very important. Who should participate in the management review? Top management, middle level management, front lines. So you need to identify the different roles and responsibilities. What's the responsibility of the QMR? What's the responsibility of the document controller? What's the responsibility of the lead auditor? Define this in your management review process. Who will facilitate the review? What's the role of the process owners? What's the role of the auditors? Are they going to present their audit findings? Who's going to present data and report based on the agenda? All this should be identified, including, of course, logistics. Make sure that the responsibilities is clearly defined in your procedure. Second, of course, the scheduling. You need to also specify this in the procedure. When do you conduct management review? This has to be planned. This shouldn't be an afterthought. Hey, it's already fourth quarter. Let's do a management review. You always look forward to this. You know, everyone knows that there will be a management review, let's say, for example, every second week of November. If that's your schedule in an annual basis, make sure that it is defined in the process. And most importantly, determine the inputs as well way ahead. what should be the inputs or the agenda. This is very important so that the resource persons, those assigned to present the inputs, could prepare properly and present their inputs during the management review. We don't want to go to the management review only to find out that the data is not ready. The reports are even not consolidated yet. Say, for example, customer satisfaction is one of the most important inputs, and the person tasked to prepare for this has not even conducted a customer survey for the year. So make sure that in the procedure, that's why I strongly recommend you document this, is you already identify what these inputs are. And if you have inputs, you should also have outputs. After you have completed the management review, how long do you do this? Well, it depends. Others would do this, say, half a day, the whole day. Others would do this for 2 days, again, depending on the scope of your organization. Whatever the case may be, at the end of every review, you have to ensure that you come up with outputs. What do you mean outputs? These are your minutes, or these are your agreed action plans. As a matter of fact, this management review output should be documented. If you review your ISO 9001, it says there that this has to be retained, documented information. You have to present this. If you recall what I said earlier, the certification bodies, one of the first few questions they ask from you when you apply for certification is that, have you already conducted a management review? If yes, can you submit to us a controlled copy of your minutes of the meeting? All of this should be in that procedure. The management review process is not required to be documented by the ISO 9001. However, I strongly recommend that you put this into writing, that you document this into a procedure, defining who's responsible in the preparation, who will facilitate, who will present, who should be part of this management review. Second, when are we going to do this? Third, what are the mandatory inputs or agenda? This is standard. This is prescribed by the ISO 9001. So you go back to clause 9.3. And then lastly, what should be our outputs and how do we capture this into the document, including notes, observation, agreements, everything that you have discussed during the management review. The next question here is that what should be reviewed? Now here's first, customer feedback. Prior to the management review, this customer satisfaction survey form should have been distributed, collected already, analyzed. The survey results is just raw data. So you cannot present raw data during the management review, right? Or your managing director or your CEO or your GM, you probably hear it from him if you just give him the raw data. You have to include your data analysis for the customer feedback. So make sure that it's there. The customer feedback. What else should we include? Of course, the audit findings. This is very important. That means that prior to the management review, you should already have conducted your internal quality audits or your internal environmental management system audit or health and safety audit, whatever the standard is. So make sure that the audit results are consolidated, summarized, prepared, and ready for discussion during the management review. What are these findings? Audit results. So if you have conducted, for example, 3 audits, then make sure that the results of the 3 audits are prepared and presented. What's next? Take note that you also have your SWOT, right? If you go back to your 4.1, you have your SWOT maybe analysis or matrix, or maybe you're using a more specific customized tool in identification of your external, internal issues. The internal and external issues should also be covered during management reviews. Like what are these? For example, maybe you've mentioned in your strategic planning that one of our weaknesses is the lack of manpower or maybe issues pertaining to data loss or data breach. You should continuously discuss this. Why is it? Because again, your ISO 9001 is risk-based thinking. And guess what? The risk that you have identified in your SWOT 6 months ago may have already changed. They may not be the same risk this time. So include that in the discussion. Next, of course, the process performance. What do we mean process performance? How do we measure this process performance? During management review, the process owners or the department heads or the chief of every division doesn't know how to present process performance. Take note that your procedures, they should have their own respective KPIs, key performance indicators or criteria. Now, if you're familiar with the turtle diagram, if you have attended our previous programs on this, we have discussed how do you identify KPIs in the process by using the turtle diagram. You go to our YouTube channel, it's recorded, it's there, auditing using turtle diagram. But anyway, the process should have its own respective KPIs. What are KPIs? Maybe timeliness, maybe 0 rework, 0 complaints, or 0 backlog. All those are KPIs that you should embed in the process so that you can evaluate the performance of the process. Top management would like to know which processes are effective, which processes are not working. You should also include quality objectives. Up to what extent have you achieved the quality objectives? Take note again, ISO being risk-based thinking, All high risk or medium risk should have its corresponding quality objectives, targets, and programs. So now when you do management review, it is time to determine up to what extent have we covered, have we reached this quality objective. Each department's division now will have to present their quality objectives in terms of accomplishment or in terms of progress. You will also include preventive actions or corrective actions. If you have control measures, if you have non-conformities from 6 months ago and you have implemented preventive actions or corrective actions, now is the time to discuss if they are effective. You can see from these items A to F, one key discipline is very glaring here, is very, very crucial and important, and that is analysis. That is data analysis or root cause analysis. So ensure that your process owners have their own analysis before they come to the management review. They cannot just present raw data. They cannot just say, yeah, well, it's not effective. We don't know why. Right? So make sure that they have their own data analysis. And lastly, make sure that they have recommendations for improvement as well, so that the management review is smooth, to lessen more argument, discussion. Well, let the board or let management or let the other stakeholders question the recommendations. What's important is that you have basis for all of this. You have analyzed it. Let me emphasize the importance of analysis. If you go to clause 10.2, the root cause analysis, this is always lacking, the analysis part. So why is the corrective action not effective? What's your analysis? Why do we have 5% increase in customer satisfaction? What's the analysis? Whether it is positive or negative, what's the analysis? Why are we 60% against target in the OTP? What's the analysis? Why did the risk change? What's the analysis? So it is root cause. It's data analysis that is always lacking in the management review. We've mentioned that there are internal and external, for example, in the agenda. Internal agenda, internal issues in the agenda, and external issues in the agenda. Let's further classify this. What are internal issues? What are internal topics to be included in the agenda? Do not forget the minutes from the previous management review. If you have already conducted management reviews previously, go back to that. These are internal items that you will have to cover for your management review. Another internal, the policies, objectives, targets, and programs that you may have. All these are internal, part of the agenda. The results of the QMS and the process audits, these are internal. So I'm just sharing with you, I'm just categorizing this into what are internal and what are external, because we've mentioned a while ago that you need to also review external and internal issues. The objectives can fall under the internal, and do not forget the assessment of risk management actions. Take note, you have your risk register. In your risk register, you did identification of risk, assessment of risk, and then coming up with control measures. Take note again that your assessment of risk should be updated, hence your management review. The risk landscape is ever changing. The risk profile is always changing. And so you need to assess it again and review it during the management review. That's why I always emphasize root cause analysis. When you go to the meeting room during management review, do not just present raw data, support it with your analysis. Now, what are external? So in the internal, external would be, look at this, new or proposed legislation or regulations, especially if this is affecting your system. This might affect your quality management system. All of a sudden, you could no longer enter into a particular geographic location. Then how will that affect your procedure? This pandemic, for example, has caused so many limitations. What sort of new legislations are we going to put in place? Working from home guidelines, COVID-19 guidelines for workers, going to the office. This goes along benefit welfares that we should provide. All of these proposed new legislations and regulations. Do not forget performance of external providers and suppliers. So make sure that this is part of your agenda. If you have 10 or 15 crucial suppliers, make sure that they have been evaluated prior to the management review. Who's in charge of this? Maybe your purchasing manager. So make sure that you assign this ahead to resource people so that they can prepare the data. What about this external issue as well? Changing expectations and or requirements of relevant interested parties. Remember in 4.2, you have an interested parties matrix. Who are they? What the requirements are? What are the needs and expectations? Are there changes to this? So who should present this? Maybe you assign this to the department head, the division chief, or the QMR, whoever that is. Make sure that this is covered as part of the external issues that will be covered in your management review. And of course, maybe if there are new technology, for example, you would want to adopt new technologies, present this as well. You can invite, say, third-party experts in the management review to present what sort of new technologies would you like to adopt. If you'd like to implement some new forecasting technology or data analytics or maybe artificial intelligence or what that is, or maybe just improve security of your data servers, whatever that is. And then, of course, the changing market preferences of customers. So obviously with these topics, it entails a lot of preparation. So in management review, preparation. You cannot just go to the management review and wing it and say, okay, we have an agenda, let's just see what we can discuss and see where the discussion leads us. You have to prepare all this information. This should be now your audit checklist. Absence of any one of this will be a lapse in the adequacy of your management review. This is one of those parts wherein ISO 9001 is very prescriptive. It prescribes these inputs, outputs, external issues, internal issues into your discussion during the management review. It didn't give you the free hand as to what to discuss. Use this as a checklist to ensure that your management review is adequate. Do not forget about the preparation part, assigning to whom, who should do it, what are the different responsibilities of management, top management, frontline, and other process owners, what's the schedule, and so on and so forth. There are 6 areas of focus that I'd like you to pay attention to, and these are the following. And these 6 areas of focus would, in our experience, add value to your ISO. First, risk and opportunities. Make sure that you focus your review on 6.1, which is the risk and opportunities. What do you mean by this, John? Number 1 audit point. Have we included the important processes in the risk assessment matrix? You miss one process in the risk assessment, that risk is no longer controlled. So review the risk assessment matrix, the risk register. Have you included crucial processes? How do we know if this is crucial? Of course, these processes are needed to achieve your desired results. Are the risk controls still effective? Is the assessment the same from 6 months ago to now? Take note that the risks are always changing. The risk before may no longer be risk now. We may have new sets of risks. So go back to the risks and opportunities and reassess. Question this during the management review. Second area of focus would be possible changes that might affect the system. So that's 6.3, management of changes. If there's one thing for sure about your QMS, it's that it's going to always change. That's why I couldn't imagine the quality manual just sitting there inside of a cabinet. The procedure manuals are collecting dust. It cannot happen because the processes are always changing. Your business is always dynamic. Once the customer preference have changed, once there are new laws and regulations, this will by default change as well your system. So your question here as an auditor is that what changes have you identified? Next, 8.4, external provider and suppliers performance. So this is my pick, all right? You have seen the agenda already, inputs, outputs, but in our experience, this has one of the greatest impacts to your management system. If you have unreliable provider and suppliers, that would greatly affect the way you operate your processes, your business. So make sure that someone is in charge of this to present who the providers and suppliers are for the last 12 months and how are they performing. Do we need to blacklist someone? Do we need to re-accredit someone? Do we need to re-evaluate a supplier? And who are performing well? And so we sustain relationship with those who are reliable suppliers because, again, they are an important part of our supply chain. So we have to make sure that there's always constant supply, whatever that is that you outsource, whether it's a raw material, whether it's a product, or whether it's a service, whether it's knowledge, whether it's training, whether it's audit. Do not forget this, customer satisfaction and perception. So assign a person or a team, group of process owners who's in charge to gather the raw data, to consolidate the data, to do data analysis, and after the data analysis, come up with their recommended improvement action plans. You may want to include there the margin of error, the size of the universe, the sampling size. Yes, please feel free to include that. Let us know what's your data analysis and, of course, the audit result. Now, I'm always asked this question during management review, is it important that all the audit findings are properly closed already? Well, it depends. The corrective action reports may have different time frames or timetables. So others may be long-term, others are short-term. So it depends. So go back to the corrective action monitoring sheet and see which of those corrective action reports are supposedly closed so that we can just evaluate during management review if indeed the corrective action implemented are effective. Again, boils down to analysis. Analysis. Root cause analysis, as a matter of fact, especially in audit results. Because once there's a finding already, we will take a look at 3. These are 3 things you cover during management review when audit results are presented. Number 1, correction. What's the correction presented for these audit findings? Number 2, what's the root cause analysis presented for each corrective action? And lastly, what's the corrective or preventive action? Don't forget 10.2. This is my 6th area of focus. Non-conformity and corrective action reports should be presented by the process owners. Who should present it? The auditee as much as possible. Why? Because it's the auditee who has implemented the non-conformity and corrective actions. They're closest to the ground. They're the ones implementing it. So they would know which one is working, which one is not working. Finally, this should be your outputs. You may add to the list. So A, process improvement actions. So after you have done analysis of data from customers to external providers to corrective actions, how do we improve the process? So take note, we have baseline process, improved process. That baseline process is basically prior to the management review. After the management review, that process would have changed already. What are the changes? So go back to your SIPOC. If you have attended our previous programs, we've covered also SIPOC. SIPOC stands for source, input, process, output, customer. So your SIPOC diagram will change. So what are the changes? Including process controls. What will be the changes? B, improvement actions for your QMS in general. Say, for example, one of the issues identified during management review is that the new entrants or the new employees, we found a lot of customer complaints coming from there. And we agree that, well, because they lack training. And so the changes in your QMS is to make sure that part of new employee onboarding is the mandatory training or induction. C, product and or service improvement actions. What changes are you going to make with your services or your products? Matter of fact, this is a checklist. So do not leave the meeting without this covered. D, resource allocation. With all these changes come along resources, right? So what sort of resources are you going to put in place, whether it's human resource, whether it's budget or finance, whether it's an equipment, what resources are we going to put in place? Maybe you need to revise your business plans or your operational plans. And finally, maybe some changes on your policies, or maybe you need to recalibrate your quality objectives, as some of them may not be smart. Some of them, after implementation, we've realized that they are not attainable. It's so hard to measure them. You may add to the list. This should be in the list. Make this, like I said, as a checklist, your audit checklist. Lastly, don't forget, this item A to F should be a documented information. That, my friends, is your management review process. And how do you audit it? Converting this into audit checklist, making it sure that they are complied with.